In the previous videos, we've discussed dynamic SQL, and we've given a couple of examples, one of which we backed up all the databases in our server, on our server that were non-system databases, and then the next example, we passed in several variables, a symbol, and then a between range. And so in this third example, I'm not going to really do very much code, because it's really going to be a short video to just start thinking about, with dynamic SQL, what we can use it for, because we have a lot of administrative tasks that we probably perform on all of our databases, or maybe all of our tables in a database, or maybe on certain databases, or maybe we have queries that we want to give users more control. For instance, an example of where I also use dynamic SQL, one of my as an example, one of my stored procedures that I have, I think on GitHub, it builds a table based on a workout if the table doesn't exist. So for instance, if I go to the gym and I do lat pull downs and I want to record my weight and my repetitions and everything, I will execute the stored procedure and I'll put in the exercise, lat pull downs, then the weight, then the repetitions, I think is the order that it does, and it automatically adds a date. Well, suppose I add an exercise, let's say, let me think of one. Let's say I'm going to do a straight press, and I don't have straight press at all. Straight press is not a table that exists. Well, dynamic SQL, well, first of all, the stored procedure checks if the table exists based on that exercise. If it doesn't, dynamic SQL executes, creates the table, then inserts the data. And so the user never knows whether a table exists or not. The user is just going in there and saying, oh, I want to record my workout today, which is straight press. And if the table doesn't exist, it will create the table. So just a review here, because again, dynamic SQL is very useful in certain contexts. We want to declare our dynamic SQL string, such as declare SQL. This is an example. You could do this too as well. I mean, it could be that, it could be this, it could be this, but we're going to declare our string, and in this case it's an varchar max. It could be 2000, it could be 1000. Keep in mind though, if you're going to limit how many characters it is, it needs to not exceed that limit. Then we're going to set our SQL string equal to something, and it's going to be between these single quotes, or these apostrophes is really what that is. Oh, I'm sorry. I did that wrong here. Then our third and final step with dynamic SQL is that we're going to execute SQL. Now, actually here, it's much better and much safer to do sp execute SQL. This is much superior, safer, etc., avoiding SQL injection. But this is actually, this is an extended stored procedure that executes a SQL string. So this right here, I know in the previous videos I was doing it like this. That's because those are not SQL strings that are coming from outside people. This is immediately what I'm doing when it comes from outside people. And again, I'm very careful and cautious about how much power I allow users to have when there's a dynamic SQL string. As a case in point, the example I gave you with working out, in one of my databases where I may allow users to pass in working out information, they only have certain permissions on a certain schema. There is functions that will go through the SQL string and will check if they enter basically illegal parameters that they could use for SQL injection. And then I have this right here. And so there are various processes that you can do, but you can look up dynamic SQL, SQL injection, and see what people can do. Basically, hackers use SQL injection to get into databases. So this right here is a much safer way of executing SQL than this right here. And then the other thing as well is that you can, once you look up SQL injection, you can start to build functions that you can apply to SQL strings. As a case in point, you'll find out that hackers often will put like a single apostrophe here, or a single quote here in their string. So, and like for instance, let's suppose they were going to enter, lat pull downs. So let's just do it here. So you think they're updating a table, right? So lat pull down, and what they do is this drop table and of course it executes, right? Well, but in other words, in order for a hacker to do certain things, they're dependent on the fact that you're not going through their string and looking for certain characters or looking for certain words, such as drop or delete, and and that way you can prevent that. Now, it may block some of your processes, right? I mean, if someone wants to name a table with an apostrophe in it, it's going to be a problem. And if someone, let's say, drop kick as an exercise, it's going to be a problem. But the idea is you're better safe than sorry. And but this right here, I can't stress this enough, is a much safer, smarter way of executing a SQL string. In the previous videos, the reason why I used this is to simplify it, and because those are not things that users can pass in. It's just myself. I have no reason to drop my own database. So, but this is kind of the basics of SQL, dynamic SQL. There are all kinds of processes that you'll always be doing through your database. Select queries. If you want to, open things up for yourself, especially like all that stock data I just used for myself, dynamic SQL allows me to get there. If you're going to allow users to have that ability, again, there's a lot of security that you're going to need to look into. And a great read would be SQL injection. And there's a lot of individuals that like Stack Overflow and Security Exchange, I believe. One second, I'm going to check. But they're very knowledgeable on some of the problems that can happen. And so I can't advise this enough. I would highly suggest going to those places if you're concerned about someone getting in. One second. There's Server Fault, Stack Overflow, Super User, though I don't think they're going to be the big ones to talk to. Let's see. One moment. One of these is not used as often as the other ones are. Stack Overflow, I think, is the biggest one. IT security, there it is. And so its web address is security.stackexchange.com. And yeah, you can ask about SQL injection or just look up information about SQL injection. But if you're going to give your users that ability, keep in mind it's a possible concern. Otherwise, using dynamic SQL for your own admin tasks, very useful, very helpful, and something that I highly suggest if it calls for that and if there's not a extended stored procedure that you can do it more conveniently with.